Welcome to AOA Day 2015. I'd like to start by having you look at the current motto of Alpha Omega Alpha, a professional medical organization that recognizes and advocates for excellence in scholarship and the highest ideals in the profession of medicine. These are the founders of the society in 1902. Dr. Root on your left. And this is important. This was the beginning in 1902. They wrote in the Constitution, the mission of AOA is to encourage high ideals of thought and action in schools of medicine and to promote that which is the highest in professional practice. They defined the motto, be worthy to serve the suffering. They got together as a group of medical students and felt there was a need for high ethics and professional standards, hence the beginning of the organization. Further, it was to foster the scientific and philosophical features of the medical profession, to look beyond self to the welfare of the profession and of the public, to cultivate social mindedness as well as individualistic attitude towards responsibilities, to show respect for colleagues, especially for elders and teachers, to foster research and in all ways to ennoble the profession of medicine and advance it in public opinion. It is equally a duty to avoid that which is unworthy, including the commercial spirit and all practices injurious to the welfare of patients, the public, or the profession. It was formed in 1902, currently has 138 chapters across the United States. Our chapter at Downstate is number 49 and was started in 1948. The chapter here consists of a counselor, a treasurer, my friend Dr. Donald Gerber just walking into the room, an administrator, officers elected by the students, Dean Christopher, and clinical assistant deans, currently 10. There have been 4 counselors at Downstate since its inception in 1948. And there are different categories of membership that you can be elected into AOA: student, resident, alumnus or alumna, faculty, honorary members, or a chapter, a charter member of a chapter. Again, the mission is dedicated to the belief that we can improve care by recognizing high educational achievement, honoring gifted teaching, encouraging the development of leaders in academia and the community, supporting the ideals of humanism, and promoting service to others. There's a website that has a lot of information about AOA. There have been 57 AOA Nobel laureates. We're happy to have had one from SUNY Downstate, Dr. Robert Furchgott, a faculty inductee of AOA in 1967 and the Nobel Prize winner in 1998 for his work on nitric oxide as a signaling molecule in the cardiovascular system. Our Downstate membership will have 2,187 members after tonight. I've collected the list from AOA a couple of years ago. And we're going to talk just briefly about our prominent AOA speaker today, Dr. Eli Friedman, who's only the second person that's actually been invited back to speak for a second time as the AOA lecturer. Some career highlights: after attending Brooklyn College, attended SUNY Downstate Medical Center, attended his internship at Peter Brent Brigham, residency also at Peter Brent Brigham, and a fellowship in nephrology at the same institution. He also was with the communicable diseases, where he served as a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Public Health Service for 2 years, and then went to Emory for his first faculty position. He returned to Downstate in 1963 as an assistant professor, where he established the first federally funded hemodialysis center linked to an organ transplant facility in the United States. He served as the chair of the American and International Societies for Artificial Organs. He's received honorary membership from kidney societies of numerous countries outside the United States. He invented the artificial kidney within an attaché case. He's currently researching the use of probiotic bacteria as a therapy for kidney disease. He's been the recipient of the 2010 New York Academy of Medicine Edward Gibbs Memorial Award. He has served on over 20 editorial boards. He chaired our IRB for over a decade. He served as the chief of the renal division here at Downstate from '63 to 2008, interim chair of medicine from '78 to '80, was elevated to professor of medicine in '71, and in 1992, he earned the highest academic honor conferred by New York State, named the SUNY Distinguished Teaching Professor. He served as the program chair for the American Society for Artificial Internal Organs Transplantation Society, chairman of the National Kidney Council on Nephrology, chairman of the Medical Advisory Board of the American Association of Kidney Patients. He has received about 100 awards. These are just to name a few. Dr. Doc Award here, Torchbearer Award, Best Doctors, Super Doctors, New York Magazine Best Doctors, Ronald Kasperzak Lectureship, Nova Award, Honorary Fellow of Royal College of Physicians, Lifetime Achievement Award for the International Society for Hemodialysis. Over 530 peer-reviewed publications and edited 11 books. Here's just a few of the last articles in the last 12 months. Today's lecture will be on ethical stresses on nephrologists deciding who shall die. So without further ado, our superb faculty member, Dr. Eli Friedman.
Thank you for those kind words. And what we will, if we can have the lights down just a little bit, and we can start with the first slide, please. Do I have to press the button here? Thank you. What we're going to do is to consider the impact on society and on medicine of having a means of reversing the loss of what has been termed a vital organ, an organ otherwise not possible to live without, and that is the kidney. And with kidney disease, there is sequential suffering, futility, and death. Here's a man going through uremia, the Greek word for urine in the blood, because the waste products haven't come out. And there are stages of renal failure that we won't go through today, but they ultimately threaten viability, and that's what we attempt to do in the treatment of kidney failure. Now, if one wanted to understand best how retained kidney products can poison the human species, we can look at these monozygotic or identical twins, one of whom had kidney failure before going through puberty and the other did not. And so while it's pretty bad if you're old, it's a catastrophe if you're on the way up and just going through adolescence. The screen shows the work of a young man who, under the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands, Holland, during World War II, working in a porcelain plate factory, secretly built the first artificial kidney. And the parts that he used were a Singer sewing machine motor to rotate the drum, a Ford Model T water pump to push the rinsing solution or dialysate through the artificial kidney. And few people realize or know that the membrane that he used was made by the American Viscous Company for the Nathan's hot dog, and he used American Viscous Nathan hot dog casing to hold the blood. The blood went through, and as it went through, it was exposed to the rinsing solution or dialysate, and the waste products came out. It was able to do amazing things. Here is a young man with uremic coma, and you can see the white crystals on his skin. That's called uremic frost, due to precipitated urea in very high concentrations coming out from sweat and insensible water loss. After dialysis, life returned, but how often the dialysis should be and how long each treatment should be required and still requires definition. At the end of World War II, Willem Kolff had built 4 artificial kidneys. These 4 photographed for a book on new ways of treating uremia, which was his title. And one went to Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, the only one to the United States. One to Canada, the United Kingdom, and Poland. The one to Poland was lost and never found what happened to this date. In New York, the artificial kidney at Mount Sinai produced what appeared to be a revolution in care. And as Life magazine, then one of the key sources other than newspapers, said, a vital human organ, the kidney, is replaced by salt solution and cellophane. And here we see the wrapped sausage casing around a rotating drum in the Kolff artificial kidney. But the team that evaluated the artificial kidney in the United States, Kolff's Gift, had a young intern by the name of Irving Krupp, and he was guided by a Jew who escaped from Holland as the Nazis came through, Isidore Snapper. And this was the rotating artificial drum at Mount Sinai, and it's fascinating. After they treated 17 patients, they reported in the American Journal of Medicine, it is obvious that the artificial kidney should be reserved for those cases in which restoration of renal function, kidney function, can be anticipated rather than for cases of chronic progressive kidney disease. The boat was missed entirely. They closed their dialysis unit thinking it was of no real value, and Mount Sinai stepped aside from what was to be a major evolutionary change in medicine. Willem Kolff, looking a little older now, came to the United States in the end of the 5th decade of the 20th century, and he teamed up with an unusual man, John Putnam Merrill, who was my boss when I was in training at the Peter Ben Brigham Hospital. He was the flight surgeon for the Enola Gay. That was the plane that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. He came back to the Peter Ben Brigham Hospital and started working on this artificial kidney to see whether or not he could improve it. And in the Korean War series that your parents, you can ask them about it, MASH, were made as one America's most popular TV series, the Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. In the Korean War, they showed for the first time the artificial kidney being used to treat victims of acute kidney failure due to battle injury. And Paul Tashan, shown here, was the man who later became professor of medicine at Vanderbilt University when he came back. But they picked up the lead and decided to stay with things. And Kolff went to the Peter Ben Brigham Hospital, redesigned the rotating drum. They sold it for, the Brigham sold it for $5,500, a lot of money at that time, and 40 was sold. And America started to have artificial kidneys. But this was only for acute kidney failure until a man who graduated from the Mayo Clinic and went to the University of Washington decided that he might build a device that could treat chronic kidney failure. To do that, he invented what is called the AV, arteriovenous shunt, made out of Teflon. This goes into an artery and a vein. This connector outside is removed for each dialysis, and this means you don't need a vascular surgeon to come to facilitate each dialysis. By 1960, then, we had a way to treat chronic kidney failure. But who should be treated? And that was something that was decided by Dr. Scribner's group, Who Shall Die Without Dialysis When Lacking Evidence, and they established a committee to hear the story of people who might want to live or might not want to live and decide who shall be treated and who shall not be treated. And look at what they decided. If you have diabetes, no. If you're older than 45, no. Unmotivated, what does that mean? Unemployed, wow. So these were the Seattle criteria that were the only criteria when Seattle was the only place. And they had this young person who came to Brooklyn from the Brigham and wanted to extend what he had learned in John Merrill's kidney program. Fortunately, our chief of urology at Kings County Hospital, Reginald Keith Waterhouse, was a good man, and he donated Ward A22 for the kidney program which was being established. The problems with Ward A22 is that it was in an old hospital. It had minimal electricity, only DC, direct current, no AC, and there were no drains to take all the dialysate throughout the ward where you might have multiple patients. This is what a drain setup looked like on Ward A22 of Kings County Hospital when we began. We also didn't have the money to buy the Colf Brigham kidney, so we used sheets of cellophane and plastic boards that the cellophane was called cuprophane at the time, and they were rebuilt for each dialysis, and that we started treating patients and were successful. This is the way the same ward looked after rehabilitation, and this is Norma Jean Goodwin, the first woman and the first black woman in nephrology history, who was our second fellow. Kings County Hospital got a federal grant and was the first federally funded dialysis unit in the United States. Colf came to Brooklyn because he had heard about this young man, Andrew Peter Lundeen, who graduated from Stanford University, summa cum laude, 98th percentile, and wanted to go into medicine, to go into graduate school. But no place would take him, and he spoke to Scribner, the man we saw who started chronic dialysis, who said, well, there's this crazy guy in Brooklyn, maybe he'll take you. Crazy because you wouldn't take a medical student who's got a disease where you die so far. But we took Peter Lundeen, and the dean called me and said, what are the chances that he'll graduate? And I gave an answer which I still suffer in reminiscing. I said, I guarantee it. And he did graduate thanks to Barbara Gustin Delano, who was one of our fellows, who decided to establish a program in home hemodialysis. There is Andrew Peter Lundeen on dialysis, going to medical school. Here he is with two other physicians. We had 3 physicians at the time. And Peter Lundeen became professor of medicine, chief of hemodialysis at Kings County, and he's a hero to me for the years that he lived, teaching us the benefits of chronic dialysis. Here is a sample photograph of the first patients who were treated at Kings County Hospital. We were beginning to cheat over the age of 45. We had Hispanics, black and white patients, and not everybody was employed. And here's Peter Lundeen amongst the initial group of patients that were treated at Kings County. Meanwhile, in Holland, the Netherlands, statues were being erected to honor Dr. Colf, who is being recognized around the world for changing medicine's impact. We have 2 people then who made medicine different. Willem Colf, under the Nazi occupation, built the rotating drum artificial kidney. Belding Scribner at the University of Washington said, we can treat patients repeatedly if we have a device to have access to their blood without worrying about how the vascular surgeon might come in on a weekend or at night. And the program at the Brigham, meanwhile, was going ahead with their identical twins, and they had kidney transplants in identical twins and had about 20 of them. Joseph Murray, who was the chief surgeon leading the group, that's John Merrill, the man who was my trainer. The Nobel Prize in Medicine was given to Joseph Murray in 1990. The next advance was in New York, at last, at the Manhattan Veterans Hospital, where Cimino and Brescia, who neither was a surgeon, designed a way of having access in the blood without needing a device. They made a fistula, a connection between an artery and vein in the wrist, and that fistula caused the veins to get big. Here was the operation. And now you could have vein-to-vein dialysis, one vein giving blood to the artificial kidney, the other returning the treated blood to the patient. and it worked. And here we see the next stage in our downstate evolution. Incidentally, notice please the two little flames here and here, showing how doctors used to be at conferences, and at one conference I noted that 6 out of the 8 doctors in the room were smoking. And so today they'd be shot or taken out for setting this example. Meanwhile, Franz Reichsmann, who was beginning to teach us about psychonephrology, the reaction to a disease, came and listened to Scribner as he was teaching us how to expand our program. By the year 2000, we had a full program of dialysis on Parkside Avenue, and here is Kulf cutting the ribbon to honor the opening of this dialysis unit at Kings County. We see Andrew Peter Lundin, and we see my first fellow, Gerald E. Thompson, who became president of the American College of Physicians and the Lambert Professor of Medicine at Columbia Presbyterian. We learned more than anything else as we struggled trying to make standards for who we would treat and who we shouldn't treat, that managing ESRD, end-stage renal disease, there are 2 abbreviations that will come up, CKD, chronic kidney disease, ESRD, end-stage renal disease. We have to individualize the therapy. For example, here is a woman with anoxic encephalopathy. The neurologist said her brain will never work again. She has kidney failure, but she might produce urine and live for some years, but she won't function normally. Should we dialyze her or withdraw the dialysis from her kidney failure and let her die? And what about this patient who, at the age of 93, has a minimal neurologic response, doesn't talk to us, doesn't know what's going on, but we got her out of a uremic coma, urine in the blood, and we started dialysis. Should we have continued it? And what about someone with advanced cancer? This was the worst case I could take for photography. Advanced cancer growing all over the body, 92. Should we have put her on dialysis? Remember the original Scribner criteria, no one over 45. Wow. The battle for reaching a conclusion as how we were going to treat was intensified when in 2002 the LASKER award was given to Kulf, the man who made that artificial kidney in Holland, and Belding Scribner at the University of Washington, who came from the Mayo Clinic and was the one who first started regular treatments for chronic dialysis. The 2 of them were absolutely wonderful, and we learn more about Kulf's imagination when we see how he behaved as he received his award. I was there, and he opened his jacket, and he was wearing his first design of an artificial lung. He was there getting the LASKER prize for his work on the kidney, and he chose to divert attention to what he was working on. An amazing man. Kulf, excuse me, Kulf came to Downstate and became interested in what we were doing and went to see the then president, who was still on our faculty, John LaRosa, in his office in 2006 and advised the president and me continuously until his death about 5 years later. What is the reaction that the physician should have to a patient who would prefer dying to being on this horrible dialysis machine? Well, there's this concept of advanced directives, which we now have, in which, whether you're 18 or 80, you set out what you want to do if you have a terrible disease and whether you want to be treated. And your spouse or your family or your parents have to honor your wishes with the doctors. But not many patients had advanced directives. I'll show you a few illustrative cases. Here's Art Buchwald. He was a wonderful columnist for the Washington Post. He had diabetes. One leg was to be amputated. He was 80 years old, and they said, you have to have dialysis. He said, no, thank you. If you don't have dialysis, Mr. Buchwald, you're going to die. But he didn't die. He didn't have dialysis. He lived 1.5 years, and he wrote a book, his 11th book, saying, too soon to say goodbye. Wow. Never trust your kidneys, or as I suggest, projections from nephrologists. There were organizations who came along. This is the Renal Physicians Organization, and they prepared a series of advisories trying to help us decide how to handle difficult patients. And it said, if appropriate, forego, don't do it, or withdraw ongoing dialysis for patients with irreversible, profound neurological impairment if they lack signs of thought, sensation, purpose, behavior, and awareness of self and environment. Wow. That's a difficult thing to decide, and that's where we need our psychiatrists to help us and our neurologists to tell us whether it's going to stay that way. Now, one of the other people whose cases should be brought to your attention is someone whose movie you probably saw, Tales of the South Pacific or Hawaii, Pulitzer Prize twice, and he decided after dialysis for 3 years, no thank you, 4 years, I've had enough, and at the age of 90 he decided to die, though he was in very good shape. And the richest man in Australia at this time, Kerry Packer, worth $8 billion. Today it would be worth maybe 80. $8 billion said, no thank you, I don't want dialysis, I just want to rest and think and die, and I'll go now. He turned down dialysis. So no thank you by an author, no thank you by a playwright, no thank you by a very rich person who has no reason to say no thank you. And that offers the question for today's talk, should dialysis be started if the prognosis is futile? How can you tell whether the prognosis is futile? Well, I showed you somebody with brain disease, exceptional cancer, and with community and patient bias, but the allocation of who gets dialysis has to be ethical. And one way for thinking of this is for patients older than 75 years, the decision regarding dialysis or non-dialysis medical therapy includes medical indications, patient preferences, quality of life. Wow, wow, how do you do all that? Well, you have the new neurologist help you and the geriatrician. And as a working tool, is any age too old for dialysis or transplantation? This has been studied repeatedly now, and in this study, what we see is that patients who were in nursing homes and developed kidney failure, called nephrologists, that the majority were dead in 1 year if they weren't dialyzed. And that even on dialysis, the majority died. So that if the best you can get for your patients is that it's a couple of months extension, should you start them on dialysis? In viewing this question at the Mayo Clinic of 379 patients, 75 years or older, on dialysis through 2011, the 6-month mortality was 40%. Should they have been started? While the 76% starting dialysis after an acute medical or surgical event had a 6-month mortality of 73%. Why bother with dialysis? The expense, everything else, you can't do it. It doesn't make sense. Deciding which uremic patients should be offered renal replacement therapy is a source of continuing ethical stress. Think of what's going on today. This paper was published a month ago, United Kingdom. 52%, Great Britain, of uremic patients over the age of 75, 45 per dialysis unit in London, are not started on dialysis. No. 80% of units called for better evidence that CKM, conservative kidney management, does not result in more deaths than dialysis. What should they get? Conservative treatment, or should they just be allowed to go on dialysis and do poorly, or just be ignored and hope that nobody tells the press about you? Are any very old people really well on dialysis? And that's what I wanted to find out in our Brooklyn community dialysis units. The clue that came to me to do this work was from my observations of people and how they behave over the age of 45, then 55, then 65. This is a 72-year-old woman who did not want dialysis, did not think it was worthwhile, but after she was on dialysis for 3 months, she gained so much weight she went to Weight Watchers, was happy to help her daughter get married, was playing with her grandchildren, and was grateful that we did not believe her when she said she didn't want dialysis. What about going all the way up into the 10th decade? The 10th decade. Would you dialyze anybody in the 10th decade? Well, here are two patients who came on one day, a woman and a man. They wanted to have their therapy continued and their life extended. One had taken her son to the A&P earlier in the day and pushed the cart around. The other didn't know where he was, what his two sons were doing, and didn't know why I was speaking to him. So it requires a great deal of distinction to know what you're going to do for which patients, why. And here is a picture taken of the Brooklyn Dialysis Center. This was on in the far eastern section of Brooklyn, and these are only patients who were over 80. And look how happy they were. Some of them had been on dialysis for 10 years. Well, what about those with diabetes, which is, you tell us, the most common cause of kidney failure leading to dialysis? Here are the patients with diabetes, and they were happy too. They said they were glad and they didn't want to go off dialysis. The mean age of new patients started on dialysis therapy has risen progressively. It's now 64 years. It was 62.8 when this chart was made a couple of years ago. And we ask whether the best therapy that we have, a kidney transplant, could this be of any value in a patient 65 or older? Could they ever be happy? Well, here's a group of patients who were over the age of 70 when they got their kidney transplant. Some of them, that was 4 years earlier. And when I showed this picture of them being happy, I got reactions saying, well, that was because they got a free T-shirt. And I thought about that, and I said, let's repeat the picture without the T-shirt. And here is a group of the same patients, the same group, no T-shirt, and they were equally happy. The more recent experiences have extended my feeling that we cannot have an absolute cutoff of age. This is an 84-year-old man, intelligent, articulate. He was on dialysis and wanted a transplant. He got a transplant, and look what happened for 3 consecutive years. Not one day in the hospital. Sometimes he came and wanted to leave right away. When I took this picture, he said, Dr. Friedman, you've got to take less pictures. I've got a life to live. And I said, okay, and I took the picture and he left. The general outcome of patients young, 25 to 29, old, 75 to 79, you can judge here. The yellow bar on the left in both cases is the national life expectancy without kidney disease. Then comes the green, dialysis, and dialysis with diabetes, dialysis with diabetes. A transplant with diabetes. In other words, a transplant is very much better than dialysis, and it's better if you don't have diabetes than if you do. What about the legal concerns and the ethical concerns that rack us and give us a hard day after we go home and wonder what we've done? Can we refuse therapy for an illegal alien, for someone who doesn't have citizenship, for somebody who can't pay? And what kind of people do we want to have on dialysis? Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia, had 15 illegal immigrants. They were going out of business because they had no money. They were being yelled at by their governor, and so they told the 15 illegals they had to leave. And within a short while, 4 of them died, and more than 4 more died, and so they found a way to get them into local dialysis units. But Grady was very sorry that they took this policy towards illegal aliens. Undocumented immigrants cannot be told that you'll get a dialysis when you need it because they've not faced the current reality that providing only emergency dialysis means patient death, without question. What are the provocative issues that I'd like you to think about? Say the Pope or our president has kidney failure. Should they get priority in an organ? Right now, for a deceased person for a deceased person's organ, the wait in New York State is 9 years. What? 9 years. And it's an upper age limit for recipients and a necessity. Should we sell kidneys and buy kidneys? Elderly patients who choose not to have dialysis as part of shared decision-making survive a median of 16 months. I would have taught otherwise, and I did until this paper was published. And then a number of things happened to me to change my thinking. This is our chairman in medicine, Dr. Moro Osalafu, who's sitting up front with one of his patients who was told a little over 3.5 years ago, at the age of 75, that his kidney function was such that he couldn't live for a long time, that he needed an operation on his wrist to prepare him for dialysis, and if he didn't have dialysis, he would die. Okay, the wrist went very well, the veins were big and looked good, but he said, I don't want dialysis. And he's gone for 45 months with no dialysis. How can that be? I would have signed a document absolutely saying he couldn't live more than 2 or 3 months. I was wrong. And so the glomerular filtration rate, a measure of kidney function, was 5 to 7, which means the end of the line, in this man did not mean the end of life. So the ethical stresses are selection bias, compensation, futility, and I'll give you just a couple of others so you can think about it afterwards. This is a mother with identical twins. The first twin, and we learned from the earlier slide that the twins may express their kidney disease at different times. This twin expressed his kidney disease 2 years ago, got a kidney transplant from his mother, and then this twin had kidney failure now coming on very severely, and said to his mother, if you love me the way you love my brother, you'll give me your other kidney and you'll go on dialysis. What? Should we have done that? The ethical stresses are made worse by patient hostility, criminality, and non-adherence. For example, this is a man who came to Brookdale, to Downstate, to Coney Island Hospital, beat up the nurses, stole their pocketbooks, had a dialysis, and then went to the next hospital. And he repeatedly was a criminal as he came in. But he needed dialysis. His chemical value showed it. Should we have dialyzed him? And here's a woman who was a heroin skin popper. You can see the places where she injected the heroin. Her kidney was filled with crystals of amyloid that are developed when you have cutaneous heroin infection and inflammation. She had kidney failure, but she didn't want to stop using the heroin. Should we have treated her? And here's another interesting case, 2 brothers who were convicted of murder in Sing Sing. They were in Sing Sing prison. One was the recipient, one was the donor. They were told by the governor that if the donor gave a kidney to the recipient, they'd be pardoned. They did well, they were pardoned. What? And here, different in Mississippi, the Scott sisters, they stole $11 from someone, $11, and they had already been in jail for 14 months when the governor, Haley Barbour, said, if you give a kidney, I'll pardon the 2 of you. And they said they want to be pardoned. They got out of jail to get ready for the kidney. They started eating. They were so obese that the doctors and the nephrologists in Mississippi said, we can't do the transplant right now. They have not had a transplant to this date, and they're both alive. So the timing was, and the analysis of the severity was wrong, and just about everything the doctor said was incorrect. Now think of this. A vascular surgeon in Long Island gave to a young girl who he was in love with one of his kidneys. And then she, afterward, had an infatuation with somebody else, and he wants her divorced and wants his kidney back. Similarly, this woman got a kidney from one of her employees, a live donor, and she wanted to have stability, but fired the employee. The employee said, I want my kidney back. And so the donor wants the organ back. What should happen? How should we behave? The ethical stresses, budget, cheating, quality of care. And the last one that I'm going to tell you about is percolating right now, and that is considering that there aren't enough kidneys to go around, and we look at the rate of transplants in the various countries, notice that Ghana and Nigeria and India and China have almost no transplants compared with other countries. One set is for the incidence, that's new cases. The other is prevalence, how many are now in the treatment plan who are undergoing therapy. Should it be allowed legally to sell kidneys? Well, what? No, except that we do sell organs, and we tolerate this very well. What if somebody in your family needed a kidney and you were told there were no donations possible in your family member was going to die, didn't want dialysis, and you could buy a kidney? Well, as of 2006, foreigners received 2/3 of the 2,000 kidney transplants performed annually in Pakistan, the same thing in India, other countries, and is selling body parts legal? And I said no, except for blood, marrow, stem cells, and you can even sell babies. And so all of this is allowed, but not for kidneys and not for money. The organ transplant law says it's unlawful for any person to knowingly acquire, receive, or otherwise transfer any human organ for compensation, $50,000 and 5 years imprisonment. The World Health Organization estimated that in 2012 there were 10,000 black market kidney operations involving human organs each year. And America's leading ethicist, and in some places in India, like the village of Vilakam, every young woman between the ages of 15 and 30 has sold a kidney. Every young woman they could find for National Geographic. Now, this is a report from a very distinguished ethicist, and I'll just summarize it by telling you that China had admitted that they were sentencing people to death so that their organs could be used to salvage other people who would pay for it and give some money to the prison, and that the sale of kidneys from people who were executed was usual in China. What? Look what's happening in the United States. Over the past 10 years, the rate of transplantation for living donors has gone down. The rate for deceased donors has remained about constant. So the donor kidney reality, more than 105,000 Americans now wait for kidney donors. Donations from living, deceased donors have remained flat. The wait for a kidney in the U.S. is greater than 3 years, but greater than 9 years in New York City. I have to speak with my daughter, who's in the audience now and is in charge of transplants for the greater New York area, as to whether my statement about greater than 9 years is still valuable. 14 wait-listed people die every day, more than 16,000 per year, while waiting for a donor kidney. The price of the whole operation for a donor kidney, if you're a kidney buyer in Israel, it's up to $35,000. If you're in Moldova, you can go up to $250,000. If you're in Thailand, it's $10,000. But kidneys are readily sold by organized vehicles and systems throughout the world today. And I just checked this report. I checked it yesterday before today's lecture. In Mexico, you can call up, the number is here, and get a kidney, all treatment, and everything for the donor and the recipient for $47,000. If you go to Tijuana, should you do that? Is it bad? Is it really amoral? Or are you helping some poor person in Tijuana get money for their family? That's the ethical question that's uncovered. Now, the transplant surgeons as a group have said that they favor the incentives of paying for organs, and Thomas Starzl, who was a great transplant surgeon, and all of these surgeons endorsed the idea of being able to buy kidneys and market them in the United States. This was written in 2009. Here's one plan, this is my plan, as to how we could handle kidney sales, remove the legal strictures, set the price, retain United Network for Organ Sharing to look at everything we do, and give the donor who sold a kidney Medicare for life, counsel and risk disclosures, evaluate the program after 1 and 2 years to see if it's worthwhile. So in conclusion, what we've talked about is the ethical stresses on nephrologists. End-stage renal disease is globally underfunded. As a treatment would cost today. Patient education is deficient. Dialysis survival is improving. Transplants are the best therapy, whether you're young or old. End-stage renal disease life quality can often be okay. Think of Dr. Salafu's patients who said after 3.5 years, no, I don't want dialysis, I'm doing fine. Buy kidneys and get more. I thank you for your attention and want to congratulate the Alpha Omega Alpha individuals who have just become members, both faculty and with the lights on, faculty and students, because they've joined a group of people who can only enrich your lives by your continuing contact with them. Thank you very much.